Okay, welcome everybody. This is going to be a little bit of a different video than my usual kind of Friday react to videos, and this is also going to be a little bit different than my usual kind of sit behind the record bookcase, record wall unit, and kind of talk about certain things. This one is, I think at the end of the day, this is going to be a video of me working out my own thoughts about this whole situation. Because it's messy, it's a messy situation, and I think almost because of that, this video is going to be a little bit messy. So bear with me as we work through this. So yeah, it's not really scripted. I have a few notes and a little bit of a guideline just to keep me on track and keep me on level. But yeah, this is going to be very unedited. I'm not going to do a whole lot of edits to this video, if any. This is kind of going back to when I used to do those unedited notes videos. But yeah, this was something that I even debated talking about. I didn't know what I could add to the conversation. I didn't know what I could put in terms of like insight or anything along those lines, but I think at the end of the day, I wanted to make this video for myself, mainly just to help myself process all of what's going on, and to kind of work through it myself. So the fact that you guys are watching it is kind of secondary for me. This is just me working through the whole thing myself. So I think in design is going to be messy. And hey, it's a popular topic in a number of different reasons because Dark Side of the Moon is celebrating their 50th anniversary, and yeah, it's garnering a lot of attention. So without, burying the lead or beating around the bush anymore, we're talking about Roger Waters today. We're talking about Roger Waters and kind of everything that he's been up to this past week. Because, oh boy, this past week has been a week for Mr. Rogers. Yeah, a little bit of background before we dive directly into it. I mean, for those of you that don't know about Mr. Rogers, Mr. Roger Waters, he was one of the founding members for Pink Floyd, along with Syd Barrett, Nick Mason, and Richard Wright. The four of them kind of started it all off. And then when Syd Barrett began to leave, they brought on David Gilmour. And then Syd Barrett eventually left, and then we got the quartet once again. And then they went on to, make history with creating some seminal masterpieces of rock music. And I think what really distinguishes Roger Waters is that he's always been very political. Basically right from Dark Side of the Moon onward, all of his records have been political in one way, shape, or form. And this was, in the mid-70s. 1973, we're coming on to the 50th anniversary for Dark Side of the Moon. And because of this, I don't want to say that he's like really ever been in hot water, but I mean, he's never been shy of putting his politics, his personal beliefs forefront and center. And for the most part, I agreed with most of what he was saying. It was always like human rights, basic human decency for everybody, regardless of sex, religion, credo, age, anything like that. It was, make sure that you have your basic human rights, life, pursuit of happiness, all that good stuff, all that good stuff. And he was also extremely, extremely critical of most world leaders, specifically Western world leaders. I remember seeing him when he was doing the Dark Side of the Moon tour back in 2007. Really like flaunting his ill satisfaction to Bush. And he did the same thing in his last tour with Us and Them, chopping a bunch of speeches in with Donald Trump, and being extremely outspoken about that kind of stuff. And he's also been very outspoken about the struggles and the conflicts and the situation that's been going on between Israel and Palestine, basically siding with Palestine. And that's a huge sticky wicket. It's definitely one of those I'm not even going to begin to touch with a 10-foot pole But he's always been very, very supportive of the Palestine and the Palestinian people. And I mean, on the one hand, I agree with siding with the people, but yeah, anyway, I'm not gonna, it's a massive, massive, just, ugh, ugh. But that's Roger Waters. He's always been extremely outspoken. All of his albums have been very political. I mean, Animals is hugely political. The Wall is hugely political. The Final Cut is hugely political. And those are just the Pink Floyd albums. We also have Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking, Amused to Death, Is This the Life We Want? Like, all of these are extremely, extremely political in their stance. So I've been yammering on a lot about a lot of the background, and I haven't even really touched what's been going on. And I mean, this isn't necessarily the first time that he's been in hot water lately. In a recent interview when he came through Toronto, the Toronto Star didn't really give him the light of day because Drake was also in town. So Roger Waters was like, well, I'm more important than Drake will ever be. And I'm like, well, Drake has a lot more years in front of him than you do, man. He has a lot more longevity at this point. We'll see. I think history will be the judge of that one. And he also got into some pretty hot water in terms of not being, being excommunicated essentially from Poland, because he has for lack of a better term, and to kind of get right down to it, he's kind of sided with Russia with the whole Russia and Ukraine war that's been going on. Basically spoke out against any Western influences and Western aid and assistance to Ukraine. And speaking out against some of the political leaders in that respects, saying that they are prolonging the war, they are leading to more deaths. And I mean, on one hand, I see where he's coming from, but on the other hand, the best way to stop the war, the best way to stop any of these deaths is just to have Russia retreat. That's the easiest way, so providing aid and providing defense for Ukraine, sure, it's kind of the lesser of two evils, besides them just throwing down their guns and weapons and throwing up their hands to be shot down at the wall, So, I feel as though within his later years, I see where it's all coming from a good intent, but it's just being twisted and warped in this weird sense of self-importance and self-idealizing, So, yeah, because of that, Poland was basically like, hey, that's not cool. If you come here, you're not going to be welcomed. So Roger Waters was basically like, okay, here's a massive middle finger. I just won't be playing for you. So, he canceled a lot of his Polish concerts, which... at the end of the day, all you're doing is you're hurting your Polish fans. If you're all about the citizens, standing with the citizens and preaching love and acceptance to all mankind, then why are you removing yourself from the enjoyment of your Polish fan base? If you're trying to criticize the Western assistance of that, why aren't you pulling out of your US shows? Why aren't you pulling out of your UK shows? Why are you only punishing your Polish fans? Anyway, that's all a little bit of a history, and it's taken me this long to get there. So yeah, now this past week, my really good friend Grace Hayhurst, who we have our podcast The Metalhead with, she sent me an article, an interview that was originally in German, but then posted in English to his own webpage. And I want to reiterate that it's his own webpage that he had posted the English translation to. And it was a lot. There's a lot in here. And I really honestly couldn't believe what I was reading half the time with this. It seems like he's definitely doubled down in terms of essentially supporting Russia within this war. And also kind of going over the deep end in terms of his ownership with Pink Floyd's music. And I'm getting flashbacks from the 80s when he tried to sue David Gilmour and Nick Mason for continuing the Pink Floyd band with Momentary Lapse of Reason and The Division Bell, which he subsequently lost. Which is why we have Momentary Lapse of Reason and The Division Bells, two fantastic Pink Floyd records. So this big, massive article was released, and I'm going to get to that in detail a little bit later. But I want to talk first about the backlash that this has had, because there was one extremely vocal individual that spoke out about this, specifically spoke out about some of the more intense items, shall we say, for lack of a better term, of what was going on, and that's a tweet, as all cesspool items, as all horrible things are coming from. It came from Twitter. It came from Polly Samson. And for those of you that don't know, Polly Samson is the longtime partner and wife of David Gilmour. She's the lyricist of a lot of his songs and music. A very brilliant woman. And so she says on a tweet, and I'll quote this from February 6th, so only 4 days ago. Sadly, Roger Waters, you are an anti-Semitic to your rotten core, also a Putin apologist, a lying, thieving, hypocritical, tax-avoiding, lip-syncing, misogynistic, sick with envy, megalomaniac. Enough of your nonsense. Yeah. So she doesn't mince words. She's a poet. She knows what she's talking about. She clearly put a lot of forethought into this. It was a direct attack against Roger Waters. And at time of recording, it's had over 10 million views. To which her husband, husband of Polly Samson, good old David Gilmour, retweeted, or I guess quote tweeted, every word demonstrably true. So I guess we won't be having a Pink Floyd reunion show anytime soon, unfortunately. So yeah, that's a lot. I mean, most of the time when band members have feuds or, have beef with one another, it's usually behind the surface. Like, we always knew that David Gilmour and Roger Waters weren't getting coffee every other week. They weren't buddies. I think we had the last reunion tour at Live Aid, going back probably about 20 years ago now. So yeah, definitely no reunion show in the works. And it also kind of demonstrates that there's still some pretty bad blood. And I mean, Roger Waters has mainly been the most outspoken individual within this feud, posting to his website about his frustration and lack of support when the Animals remix was coming out, and he wanted to include this new updated poem. He wanted to include some additional items within the liner notes. And David Gilmour and the rest of Pink Floyd was like, nope, you don't have access to any of our official media, which is fair. I mean, Roger Waters isn't a part of Pink Floyd. He hasn't been a part of Pink Floyd since the early 80s. After the Final Cut came out, he was like, okay, I'm done. Pink Floyd is done. I am Pink Floyd and I am done. Thus, Pink Floyd is done. And I mean, at that point, David Gilmour and Nick Mason were like, brah, there's still two of us in this band. I think we get to say as well, we've helped write the music. Even if all these albums that we have put out have been your vision, the music that's found on it is ours. And I don't think Roger Waters sees that. I don't think Roger Waters really quite understands the collaborative nature that a band is. In his mind, again, I'm kind of projecting my own thoughts here, but again, this is also me trying to understand and come into Roger Waters' shoes to get where he's coming from within a lot of this, because we're going to talk a little bit about, you know, this in a second about what he's doing with Dark Side of the Moon. But like, because he was the one that came up with these concepts and these ideas, he feels that he purely owns it. I mean, I work a lot with intellectual property and copyright and all that. So yeah, I think because he believes that he owns it fully and wholeheartedly, um, he owns Pink Floyd, but the courts ruled that he didn't when David Gilmour and Nick Mason wanted to continue on. So I don't think he's ever really healed from that. And I can understand that. I mean, if you created something and you put your heart and soul into it, and you see what other people are doing, even if they helped you out with it, it can still be frustrating when you don't have a say about how those things are repackaged and repurposed going forward. Like, I'm pretty sure he was not consulted in any of the box sets that are being put out, in any of the reissues, and when you tried to do it with Animals, he was barred from it. So I can understand the frustration within that. But also, man, you got to learn how to let go. You know, artists sell their creation to corporations daily, where corporations own 100% of the IP of those items, you know, and they have zero say over what happens to them once the contracts are up. Like, how many showrunners are extremely frustrated with studios when they feel as though they've told their story, but the studio still says that we want more. Or when they don't get to finalize their story and the studio says that it's canceled, you know? So, like, maybe you want to get over yourself in that sense. You've written other projects and other works after the fact that are fully and 100% yours within your solo career. And just because they didn't do as well, you know? Like, I know Amused to Death and Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking and Is This the Life We Really Want? They're definitely not as cult followy or as popular as Dark Side of the Moon and all the other Pink Floyd projects. So yeah, that's a lot of kind of talking around this to help me kind of get around what's going on within this. So with these tweets, a lot of social media for Roger Waters has gone up subsequently. And this was on his Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, so it wasn't just contained on Twitter like the Polly Samson tweet was. But it's, and I'm going to quote here, Roger Waters is aware of the incendiary, this is me reading as a dyslexic, you get to witness it firsthand. I'm going to start again. Roger Waters is aware of the incendiary and widely inaccurate comments made about him on Twitter by Polly Samson, which he refutes entirely. He is currently taking advice as to his position. So there's a few things that I want to unpack within this. The first is that the claim that the comments made were wildly inaccurate and incendiary, which is hard. Again, whenever you're dealing with a case of defamation, yeah, of course you're going to backlash by saying that it's false and that it's wildly inaccurate. But Roger, David Gilmour comes out by saying it is demonstrably true. And you don't have to look hard to find instances where Roger Waters is a Putin apologist. I mean, he says it basically in this article that I'm going to get back to eventually. Now, the lying, thieving, that's a little bit harder to nail down. But hypocritical, yeah, you can definitely see where he's coming from in that one. Tax evading, absolutely. I mean, I don't know what UK artist hasn't attempted tax avoidance at some point. Lip syncing, yes, we know that he's been lip syncing, maybe not for the entirety of his shows, but definitely a lot of his shows lately. Misogynistic, yeah, again. Sick with envy, I mean, you can kind of see how he's definitely envious of a lot of the Pink Floyd discography after that and all these box sets that are being released. And, you know, I'm sure he's getting a little bit of the chunk of the pie in terms of the revenue for that, but he hasn't been at the table to discuss a lot of that. So, and Megalomaniac. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that is definitely not in the course of wildly inaccurate. I think that, you know, it'd be very hard pressed for Roger Waters to try to prove that. So, yeah, the other aspect of this, and again, he refutes entirely, and I understand, you know, of course you're going to refute it. You're not going to be like, yep, yeah, hit it on the nose. Yeah, I'm the problem. It's me. I see myself in this. You know, I feel seen by this. He's not going to do that. He definitely isn't going to do that. But it's the last part there. He is currently taking advice as to his position. And I at least want to applaud Roger Waters for doing that, you know, by not immediately coming out with a statement against Polly, you know, not doing a fly by your pants statement, because that's only going to make matters worse. So at least he's doing that. He's probably got a very talented and a very well-paid PR team right now working hard to try to salvage some of his images, especially now that we're kind of at this point within the video, getting into what was actually said in the article, this big article within the Berlinger. And again, it was originally in German and it was translated into English. And yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. And I can see where Polly was coming from after reading a lot of this. Man, he's going to have to walk back a lot. Again, and I think this is why he's working. What was it? Here, let me pull that back up again, just so that I can properly, working with one hand is fun. Yeah, he is currently taking advice as to his position. Yeah, it's good that he's, for once, taking advice from other people in this, so that he's not flying by the seat of his pants and just coming up with something that can do some major damage to his image. I mean, I don't know how much can be salvaged at this point. So let's talk about this article. It's an interview, as I mentioned, from the Berlinger, originally in German. And in my mind, there are two pieces to this. I mean, there's a lot of pieces to this, but two important pieces of this. The first is Roger Waters going whole ham in being a Putin apologist. I wouldn't necessarily say he is completely pro-Putin, but he basically says, you know, looking at the UK government and the Western government under Biden, and comparing that piece, the Western government, and then looking at Putin and the Russian government, he would probably choose the Russian government. And it's like, oof. And again, I'm paraphrasing, I'm slightly putting words in mouths, but I kind of have to synthesize a lot of what Roger Waters was going through. Yeah, there's like, even within this interview, and I'm going to quote it, the interviewer said, Roger Waters starts off with, "First of all, you can read my letter to Putin and my writings around the start of the war in February." The interviewer says, "You called him a gangster," and he continues, "Exactly, I did, but I may have changed my mind a little bit in the last year." There is a podcast from Cyprus called The Duran. The host speaks Russian and can read Putin's speech in its original. Their comments on this make sense to me. The most important reason for supplying arms to Ukraine is surely profit from the arms industry. Roger Waters isn't wrong about that. And whenever a war is going on, there's the war factory supplying it and profiting from it. So Roger Waters isn't necessarily wrong about this, but it's this next part. I wonder, is Putin a bigger gangster than Joe Biden and all of those in charge in the American politics since World War II? I am not sure. Putin doesn't invade Iraq or Vietnam, did he? And, I mean, he's invading Ukraine. Again. I can see where Roger Waters is coming from, but he's drawing the wrong conclusion. So it seems as though, to me, within this, I feel as though Roger Waters is doing what a lot of people did in lockdown and finding some fringe reports and drawing some wild conclusions about that. It's kind of what happened with a lot of very extreme groups where, you didn't have anybody to basically sit you down and be like, that's ridiculous. And when you don't have that, you are able to draw your own conclusions based on the information that you're reading. And I think what Roger Waters has fallen into is that, and I get it, he doesn't trust Western media. And he calls it propaganda. And again, he's not completely wrong, but I think he's taken a step too far in basically saying that all reports about Russia within this, and all reports about, everything that's coming out of this is being twisted. It's being politicized. It's being propagandized. And I mean, it's a breakdown of the trust between the media and its citizens. And Roger Waters, being a citizen, he has lost all trust of that. And so he's going now to all of these fringe reporters. And I hate to say that this is a symptom of what's going on politically within the U.S. specifically, but we're seeing it in other countries as well, because of the media circus going on. There's been a breakdown of trust between the citizens and the people. And I find the media hasn't really doubled down in terms of trying to regain that trust. They are instead continuing to chase the profits of getting the most eyes on the articles, getting the most eyes on the TV screens. So I can understand how that breakdown of trust for Roger Waters has come into, but instead of looking at independent reporters, in Canada, at least we have TVO in Ontario, or CBC. CBC is a little, they've got their issues, but they're supposed to be presenting with as little bias and no propaganda. And I feel as though because Roger Waters doesn't have, or at least isn't aware of those media outlets, he's gone a little bit too far. Now, I'm also not saying that, the media that's coming out of Russia doesn't have these problems or drawbacks. They definitely do. I'm just not as aware of them because I'm not exposed to that. I recognize this and I see this. So yeah, he's starting to fall down this really dark rabbit hole. And it outlines quite deeply how this is going on, and it's not so good, to the point where there was a couple of news articles that came out last week, at the Kremlin's invitation. Roger Waters speaks to the UN Security Council, repeating the Kremlin's talking points, while Russia's Nebenzai praises Waters and the anti-war movement he represents for getting everything right. So when the Kremlin is praising you for getting everything right, you might want to take a step back and think about what you're doing. It was one of those really weird topsy-turvy moments where basically Russia asked Roger Waters to speak to the UN Secretary Council almost as a Russian representative to continue the Kremlin's talking points. And I mean, I wonder what the PR team was doing with that, with the whole, he is currently taking advice as to his position. I don't think he took anybody's advice onto that. I also wonder if he was paid for that. That's a whole other kettle of fish entirely. So basically, due to his statements within this interview and subsequent statements, Russia is like, hey, you're doing good. We want you to come on and talk to the UN for us. Which I find so fascinating because Roger Waters has been so unbelievably critical of the UN and political leaders. He's kind of starting to become one of them, and this is where that whole hypocritical aspect of it is. And even if he's saying that he's speaking for the people and he's speaking out of love and respect for all humans, you also kind of have to wonder which humans he's speaking for and which ones he's speaking not for. Yeah, that was a topsy-turvy what the hell's going on for me. And I mean, this isn't necessarily the first time that a musician has spoken to world leaders in the past, but it was just such a weird thing for Roger Waters to be doing, and to be accepting. Like, it was weird to be asked to do this, and it was even more for him to accept it and to go through with it. So that was a whole kettle of fish, and it will be very, very, very interesting to see how this all plays out. But it's the final piece. This is the one that I think I have a little bit more to bring to the table in terms of the conversation, rather than just letting you guys know about all this. And that is his re-recording of The Dark Side of the Moon. And this is just his version of it. And this, I think, and it's so funny. You can see where my priorities lie, right? All of this, I'm like, this is gross and disgusting, but whatever. It's this part that I was just like, oh, Roger Waters, no. Oh, no. Oh, no. Oh, no. Oh, no. That I was just, oh, boy. Oh, boy. So the whole interview, and this was the one where I had to take a step back and be like, what the hell's going on? The interview itself starts off with this line, and I'm just going to read it verbatim because I'm just like, what are you talking about? Roger Waters can rightly claim to be the mastermind behind Pink Floyd. No. I'm just going to blanket statement no on that one. I will say that he might have been the major driving force. I might even say that he was the one that came up with a lot of these concepts and ideas. But to say that he can rightly claim to be the mastermind, no. It continues. He came up with the concept of and wrote all the lyrics for the masterpiece Dark Side of the Moon. Okay. Factually, I can't necessarily say that that's false or untrue. But it's the way that it is written that it kind of rubs me the wrong way. Instead of just saying, yeah, he came up with the concept and wrote the lyrics. It's putting a lot of assumptions out there. He wrote the album's Animals, The Wall, and The Final Cut single-handedly. That is factually false. He may have written a lot of the lyrics. He might have written a lot of the music. He might have come up with the concepts, but he didn't write them single-handedly. The other three boys in the band helped out, Comfortably Numb wouldn't be on The Wall, and it is a part of The Wall. So to say that he single-handedly wrote The Wall is false, because David Gilmour wrote Comfortably Numb. He wrote Run Like Hell. He helped write a couple other, like Young Lust. 3 of the biggest tracks from that album. To say that, Richard Wright had 0 hand in Animals is, again, factually false. There's so many Richard Wright keyboard stylings and soundscapes and essences on that album that Roger Waters did not contribute to, So, like, you're really putting a lot of assumptions out there that are wrong. Because he didn't. He had help. You can say that he was the inspiration. He came up with the ideas. He came up with the concepts. He came up with a lot of the music. But you can't say that he wrote the album single-handedly. That is factually false. So right there, I was just like, that's not good. That's not good. But it continues. I'm going to skip down just a little bit, where he says that he plays 3 tracks from a brand new re-recording of The Dark Side of the Moon, which celebrates his 50th birthday in March. Quote, "The new concept is meant to reflect the meaning of the work, to bring out the heart and the soul of the album," he says. Continuing the quote, musically and spiritually, I am the only one singing my songs on these new recordings, and there are no rock and roll guitar solos. And this is what really irks me the most. This is what really irks me the most, because what made Dark Side of the Moon, Animals, Wish You Were Here, and The Wall so special was how the collaboration of all of these individuals. Roger Waters might be the brain of Pink Floyd, but in equal measures, David Gilmour is the heart and soul. In equal measures, Nick Mason is the bloodline within his drumming styles. Richard Wright is the essence and the spirit within his keyboards. You are spitting in their faces by saying things like this. You are actively giving them the middle finger and discrediting their artistic influences of these projects. By saying you are the only one singing your songs, they're not your songs. You might have helped be the main person behind it, but they were the ones that helped bring it to life. They would be husks of lifeless forms without them. So show a little bit more respect for your past bandmates there. I don't care how mistreated you feel you are. They're still human beings, and they still deserve a little bit of respect in that case. And if you want to pull a Taylor Swift and re-record your own albums, I applaud you and I wish you the best. Go for it, my dude. You want to re-record Dark Side of the Moon? Have at it. You want to re-record All of the Wall? Absolutely go for it. I would love to see how soulless The Wall is without David Gilmour's guitar playings. There are no rock and roll guitar solos. I wonder how amazing Money is going to be without that guitar solo. Is the saxophone still going to be on that edition of the tracks? I just think that this is so disrespectful, especially for somebody that is trying to say that he's here for love and acceptance. Again, Polly wasn't necessarily wrong when she called him a hypocrite, because you're demonstrating this right now. So yeah. I think this is kind of what I'm getting at here, And this is what's really leaving the bad taste in my mouth. I don't care if you re-record Dark Side of the Moon and you want to put your own spin on it. You want to make it your own. Fine. Have at her. I will not purchase it. I will stream it to see how it holds up to the original. Because I will be the first to say that my favorite iteration of Dark Side of the Moon is the 1-2 punch that he did on the Us and Them tour, where he did the first side of, it was chopped up a little bit and I don't really appreciate that, but he did the first half at the very beginning of his set. He did the second half in the very end of the set, and Total Eclipse and Brain Damage, the best iteration of that ever that I've heard. And I've heard countless live versions of Dark Side of the Moon. So I think Roger Waters can do some really, really good things in this. But don't discredit the work, the hard work, and the art that your fellow bandmates put into these projects, because it wouldn't be as much of a success without them. So I think that's where I kind of want to leave it. This video has become extremely long. I was only kind of hoping to do about a 10-minute video here, and it looks like we're already at the 40-minute mark. So that's, I think, where I'm going to leave it. As I mentioned at the very beginning, this was sloppy. This was not all that well thought out, but that's kind of what I wanted to do with this video, because it was also me working through a lot of these emotions, because I will say that I personally was hurt from Roger Waters' statements about what he's doing. Not what he's doing with Dark Side of the Moon, but how he's approaching it and how he is talking about it, saying that it's all his, all his, 100% his, and it's discrediting a lot of the work that his fellow bandmates put into it. And I can honestly see why Richard Wright dipped halfway through the wall if this was the toxicity that was being felt in the recording studio. So, yeah, and there's also a reason why I much prefer the Nick Mason's live stuff that he's been doing, why I've been really enjoying David Gilmour's solo stuff like Rattle That Lock and On an Island, and why I haven't really connected with anything that Roger Waters has really done outside of, and this is going to be my own little pitch, his only track that he provided for the soundtrack of The Last Mimsy, which I believe, oh shoot, what's it called? Let me check that. The Last Mimsy soundtrack. He provided a brilliant, Roger Waters, Hello, I Love You. Such a beautiful track. And the only one that I really appreciate from Roger Waters, and that was like 10 years ago. So if you haven't checked out Hello, I Love You by Roger Waters from the Last Mimsy soundtrack, and check out like the extended version. I believe that there's like a 3-minute track, there's a 6-minute track. If you can find like the 9-minute track that I used to have when I was a kid, it's real good. 15 years ago, holy jeez. Anyway, great track, go and check it out. And that's where I'm going to leave it. Roger Waters, really do take some time to reflect on where you are and also where you're getting your information from. I understand, and I get that, the Western media circuit and circus has broken your trust for a while ago, but find independent reporters with a limited bias. All reporters have a bias, but try to find one with a limited bias, and really take some time with your PR team to, currently taking advice to your position, really work with them. And maybe work out some of your anger issues. For somebody that spouts so much about love, you certainly have a lot of hate. Anyway, again, that's where I'm going to leave it. I apologize again for how messy and scatterbrained this was, but this was an exercise for me more than anything else, and you're just kind of along for the ride, so I appreciate you being here along for the ride. What do you think about all of this? This was the kind of hidden agenda that I had, because I really want to see what other people are thinking about this. This will also help me get a fuller idea of what's going on. I am never the end of the conversation. I'm always just a continuation, and I would really love to see what other people are thinking about this, especially if Roger Waters was held to a high esteem for you. How does this shape and fit in with your idea of Roger Waters? As I said, I was kind of hurt by some of the things that he was saying on behalf of David Gilmour, Richard Wright, and Nick Mason, but I'd really love to hear what you think about this. And I'm going to stop before I continue too much in this. Thank you all so much for watching and joining me on this overly long and overblown video. I think I'm going to leave it there. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.